In the opulent dining hall of the imperial palace on the Palatine Hill, Empress Agrippina watched her husband, Emperor Claudius, as he ate a single mushroom. The year was 54 AD, and the air was thick with the scent of roasted meats and fear. The servants in the room held their breath, knowing this was not merely a meal. It was an execution disguised as dinner. She did all of this for her son, the boy who would become Nero. But poisoning her husband wasn't her most ruthless act. It was the first step in a plan that was never meant to be uncovered. So why does the cold logic behind her betrayal feel disturbingly familiar? And what does that say about the lengths you might go to for those you love? To understand what happens next, you need to picture Rome in the middle of the 1st century. Not the serene white ruins you have seen in photographs, but a living, breathing, sprawling metropolis that smelled of sawdust, baking bread, and the metallic tang of blood from the arenas. This was the world of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, a family that had redefined the very meaning of power and also of paranoia. Into this viper's nest returned Julia Agrippina, known to history as Agrippina the Younger. She was not merely a noblewoman, she was imperial royalty, the great-granddaughter of the first emperor, Augustus, and the sister of the mad emperor Caligula. She had already survived a life that would have broken most. Caligula had exiled her to the desolate island of Pantelleria, a windswept rock where the only sounds were the crashing waves and the whispers of other political prisoners. When she was recalled to Rome after his assassination, she did not return broken. She returned forged into something harder than iron. The new emperor was her uncle Claudius, a man widely considered weak, easily manipulated, a scholar who had stumbled onto the throne. And Agrippina had a son, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, a boy you know by a different name, Nero. She saw in Claudius a door, and in Nero, a key. Her singular, all-consuming goal from the moment she set foot back in the city was to see that key turn in that lock, and she was willing to burn down the entire world and everyone in it to make it happen. You need to understand this was not a sudden decision. It was the culmination of a lifetime spent watching men use power and learning how to wield it better and more ruthlessly than any of them. But what she did next and the way she did it reveals a blueprint for control that is still chillingly effective today. And this is where the story stops making sense. Her first move was not one of violence, but of seduction. In the year 49 AD, she convinced her own uncle, the Emperor Claudius, to marry her. This was an act so profoundly taboo that the Roman Senate had to pass a special law to make it legal. If you had been in the Senate chamber that day, you would have felt the cold dread in the room as men voted for a union that felt fundamentally wrong, a violation of nature itself. Once she was empress, her face began appearing on coins alongside Claudius's, an unprecedented symbol of shared power, a clear signal to everyone in the empire that she was not a consort, but a co-ruler. This wasn't about love. It was a corporate merger, and she immediately began cleaning house. You must see her actions not as random cruelties, but as a systematic, calculated purge of anyone who could ever threaten her position or her son's future. Her primary rival for Claudius's affection, the noblewoman Lolia Paulina, was charged with witchcraft and driven to suicide, her estates confiscated. Agrippina then had Lolia's head brought back to Rome, and the historical accounts say she personally pried open the mouth of the severed head to identify it by its teeth. Another rival, her own sister-in-law Domitia Lepida, was accused of treason and executed. You would have seen her whispering in Claudius's ear night after night, her words dripping like a slow-acting poison into the soul of the empire. Each accusation, each death warrant, was a stone she laid in the foundation of her son's future. But the real reason for these purges was not just to eliminate rivals. It was to send a message to anyone who might consider opposing her, a message delivered in blood. The most crucial step was convincing Claudius to formally adopt Nero, placing him in the line of succession ahead of his own biological son, a younger boy named Britannicus. Imagine the scene: the aging emperor, persuaded by the woman he trusted, signing the documents that would effectively serve as his own son's death sentence. He was sealing the fate of his own bloodline, and he did it with Agrippina's hand guiding his. She had secured the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's elite bodyguards, by appointing her own man, Sextus Afranius Burrus, as their commander. She had enlisted the famed philosopher Seneca to be Nero's tutor, lending an air of legitimacy and intellectual weight to the boy she was grooming. Every door was being locked from the inside. Every escape route was being sealed. By 54 AD, all the pieces were perfectly in place on her board. The only remaining obstacle was the king himself, her husband, Claudius. And he was about to eat his last meal. The worst part, the part that history often forgets, is that Claudius may have known. Some sources suggest he was beginning to regret his decisions, starting to favor Britannicus again. For Agrippina, that meant she had no more time to wait. The decision had to be made, and it had to be made now. And that's before we even get to the part they never put in the history books about the true extent of her planning. But there's a detail buried in the record that nobody flagged at the time. The betrayal was not complete when Claudius drew his last rattling breath. The true soul-chilling betrayal came a few months later, in February of 55 AD. Nero was now emperor, a 16-year-old boy on the throne of the world, with his mother ruling through him. At an imperial banquet, Claudius's biological son, the 14-year-old Britannicus, was also present. He was a living reminder of a different bloodline, a potential rival, a loose thread in Agrippina's perfect tapestry. During the meal, a servant brought Britannicus a cup of wine. As was custom, a taster had already sipped it to prove it was safe. But the wine was served deliberately, scaldingly hot. The boy recoiled, and a servant immediately added cold water to cool it down. That water was laced with a poison so potent, so fast-acting, that the moment Britannicus drank from the cup, the effect was immediate. He lost his voice, then the ability to breathe, and collapsed onto the floor, convulsing violently. Panic erupted in the dining hall. Nobles scrambled back from the table, but two people remained perfectly still. One was Nero, the new emperor, who casually remarked that the boy was merely having one of his epileptic fits and would soon recover. The other was Agrippina. She watched the child of the man she had murdered die on the floor in front of her, her face an unmoving mask of imperial calm. Think about the person you trust most in the world, the one you believe would protect you no matter the cost. Now imagine them watching you die, their expression betraying nothing, their silence a final, absolute confirmation that your life was worth less than their ambition. Britannicus was carried out of the room while still breathing and died shortly after, his body disposed of that very night, on the same day, in a hurried funeral during a rainstorm to wash away the evidence of poison on his skin. Her work was finally done, but the true horror of how she orchestrated it all would only become clear much later. Here's where it gets worse. And here is what should make you deeply uncomfortable. This was not the act of a lone, monstrous woman. This was a conspiracy, an operation of the state itself, orchestrated with the precision of a military campaign. What you are seeing is not chaos. It is a terrifying, organized system. Agrippina was the architect, but she had a network of collaborators who were essential to her success. She had Locusta, a professional poisoner who had become something of an official state resource for discreet assassinations, on her payroll. When Claudius was poisoned, and the initial dose wasn't fatal enough,
It was the emperor's own doctor who was called in to help him vomit by tickling his throat with a feather. That feather, you see, was also tipped with poison, delivering the final lethal dose. This was a coordinated effort. The moment Claudius was dead, the palace doors were sealed. For hours, Agrippina and her allies pretended the emperor was still alive, merely resting while they finalized the transition of power. This gave Burrus, the Praetorian Guard commander she had appointed, time to gather his soldiers and present Nero to them as the new chosen emperor, securing their loyalty with a massive bribe. Seneca, the philosopher, already had a fawning speech prepared for Nero to deliver to the Senate, a speech he had written in advance. Every single detail had been planned. The official announcement of Claudius's death and the proclamation of Nero's ascension happened at the exact same moment. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a coup d'etat executed flawlessly from within the palace walls. And here is the part that feels disturbingly modern. She used the state's own machinery, its laws, its military, its bureaucracy, to execute a private agenda. You see this pattern every day in every corner of the world. It is the realization that the horror was not an accident. It was designed. But none of that prepared anyone for what they found in the records about the one relationship she could not control, the one that would ultimately destroy her, and the specific, shocking ways Nero tried to kill her. What you now understand, and what most people never will, is that this was never really about Nero's success. It was about Agrippina's control. Once Nero was emperor, she did not step back into the shadows. She stepped forward. She attempted to sit beside him during official audiences, to receive foreign ambassadors herself, to dictate policy and approve death sentences. She saw him not as the emperor, but as the vessel for her own rule. She had given him the world, and she believed that made the world hers. But the system of absolute control she had perfected was now suffocating its final subject, her own son. The boy she had molded into a god was beginning to realize he was still a prisoner. The more he pulled away, the tighter she gripped. She controlled his marriage, forcing him to stay with a wife he despised. She threatened him, reminding him that the legitimate heir, Britannicus, was dead, but that she could just as easily find another to replace him if he displeased her. This was not a political disagreement, it was a psychological war. The horror isn't just the matricide that is to come, it is the realization of what drove it. It was the pathological need of a creator to never let her creation become its own person. And so, Nero decided his mother had to die. But killing a woman like Agrippina was not easy. He tried poison first, but she, a master of the craft, had spent years building up an immunity by taking small doses of antidotes. He then had engineers design a collapsible ceiling in her bedroom, meant to crush her in her sleep, but the mechanism failed. His most infamous attempt came in 59 AD. He invited her to a banquet at his villa in Baiae, feigning a loving reconciliation. Afterward, he sent her home on a specially constructed boat, designed to fall apart and sink in the deep waters of the Bay of Naples. In the middle of the bay, under a starry sky, the lead-weighted canopy above her cabin collapsed, and the ship began to break apart. But Agrippina, ever the survivor, simply slipped into the cold, dark water and began to swim. She swam for her life silently, while another woman on board, mistakenly identified as the Empress, was beaten to death with oars by Nero's men. Agrippina made it to shore. She knew then, with absolute certainty, what her son was doing. When Nero's assassins finally cornered her in her villa, soldiers with swords drawn, she faced them without fear. According to the historian Tacitus, she bared her abdomen and said, "Strike here." She was pointing to the womb that had carried Nero into the world. It was the ultimate final act of indictment from a mother to her son. The place of his creation would be the place of her execution. The answer to the question you've been sitting with this entire video, how a mother could do these things, is this. For Agrippina, the concepts of mother and empress had merged into a single monstrous identity. Family was not a source of comfort or love. It was the raw material of power.
Her uncle was a stepping stone. Her stepson was a liability.
And her own son was her masterpiece, the living embodiment of her ambition. She did not murder her husband despite her love for Nero. She murdered him because of it. But her version of love was not nurturing. It was all-consuming, a form of ownership so absolute that it demanded total control. The terrifying logic you might recognize is the primal human instinct to protect your child and secure their future, but twisted into an absolute pathological force. She believed she was building a legacy for her son, a dynasty that would last for centuries. But the foundation she laid was so saturated with blood and betrayal that it was doomed to collapse inward, destroying both the creator and the creation. She was not simply a villain. She was an architect of a system that, by its very nature, required her own destruction for it to function as she intended. Her son could only truly rule if she was gone. Her death was the final, necessary step in her own plan. We return to that dining room on the Palatine Hill. We see the plate of mushrooms, the smiling face of an emperor about to die, and the still, watchful eyes of his wife. That single, silent moment was not just an ending. It was the beginning of a story that could only conclude one way, with her own violent death, ordered by the very son she had placed on that throne. The desire to control the lives of others, especially those you claim to love, for what you believe is their own good, is a deeply human impulse. Agrippina is simply the terrifying, absolute extreme of that instinct. The next time you find yourself trying to force an outcome for someone else, certain that you know best, remember what you just heard. Agrippina gave her son the entire world. In return, he gave her a death sentence, delivered by the cold steel of a soldier's sword. Tell me in the comments, which part of this stayed with you?